Hello and welcome to this review of Fuzzies and Other People by H. Beam Piper. So this is an ace book. I ended up reading up a fair bit about H. Beam Piper as part of curiosity, basically. So as I've said in previous videos, Little Fuzzy and Fuzzy Sapiens are two books that I've owned since the 80s, and I have read and reread and reread them, love them, great books, already reviewed. And the reason I reread them this time was partly because I wanted to, essentially. I can't reread these ones too often. But also because I've managed to pick up Fuzzies and Other People recently. It's a bit of a miracle, but this book, which I've only just picked up, is actually in worse condition than the books that I've had for decades and read a lot. It's same as them. It's an ace publication from the 80s. And you can see you've got very similar artwork on it. The little fuzzies are consistent with other ones. And you've got this completely different colour theme, foreshadowing the fact that the big culmination event toward the end of this book is a forest fire, in which fuzzies are caught. A little bit about H. Beam Piper. I don't know if you know him. It seems to me that I've never actually met in real life any person who knows him as an author. Maybe he's better known in America. He was an American author after all. And probably people who read a lot of classic science fiction and who research it know more about him than I do. I know very little. I basically read up on him a little bit in the course of thinking about this review and how I was going to present it. H. Beam Piper's writing is really beautiful. It's erudite, it covers a huge diversity of different interests and knowledge and different types of science, and he was probably as much of an omnivorous reader as anyone. Beauty of writing. He was born in the early 1900s, I think it might have been 1904, and he had a very good career. He wrote heaps of books, most of which I haven't ever read and haven't found. The Fuzzies were so popular that actually this series was picked up after his death, and other people, other authors, continued on in this world. It seems that all of his worlds have a sort of link. They talk about our world as the pre-atomic age, and it seems as if there was atomic war and then humanity diversified, spread to the stars. It's now scattered all over the galaxy. A lot of the planets are this sort of frontier type mentality. It's an interesting concept and it's well done. H. Beam Piper, a bit of a sad story. I discovered that the reason he didn't continue the Fuzzy universe is that he couldn't. I don't know if he was going to or not, but he couldn't. He committed suicide in the 60s, which is, I'm going to say, really sad. I don't think anyone really knows why he did it. He left a note, but it was ambiguous. Apparently he cleaned up his house, he covered the furniture with dust covers, and then he left a note saying, "I hate to leave a mess when I go away, but if I could clean up this mess, I wouldn't be going away," or something similar to that. So that's really quite sad. And there's a few theories about why it might have happened. One had to do with the fact that he was recently divorced, and someone suggested that by committing suicide he made sure that his ex-wife would never get any insurance. I don't know if that sounds mean and petty or it sounds really, really vindictive, but I'm going to say that the person who wrote these books does not come across as a petty individual at all. So I'm not sure about that. Another reason that's been mooted is that he was in financial difficulty. And if that was the case, then it is super doubly sad, because apparently he might have felt that he wasn't selling enough stories, and he was a professional author. He relied for income on selling stories. He was actually selling stories. His sales were fine. It's just that his manager was recently deceased and he wasn't getting the messages about having sold stories. So who knows why we lost H. Beam Piper, but I think we lost a really good author when we did, with plenty more books that he could have written for us. Right, Fuzzies and Little People. I'm going to say that this book is definitely a third in a series and should not be read independently. And I say that. I am the queen of finding books on the shelf in the op shop or the library, picking them up, randomly reading them without bothering to pay any attention to whether it's part of a series or not. Fuzzies and Other People is not going to work too well for that type of reading. It relies very heavily on the previous books. I don't think you would get anywhere near as much out of it if you read it as a standalone. So in the first two books we had The Fuzzies Were Found on Zarathustra by Jack Holloway, and by the end of the book they've been declared sapient beings, and that's a lot of court stuff, a lot of theory of intelligence, and a lot of ecology, which is great. In this one it continues on the theme, and in Fuzzies and Other People it's kind of the culmination of the political arch, because Zarathustra, the world, was previously controlled by the chartered Zarathustra Company as a class 3 uninhabited. I really should check with that one. And when the Fuzzies were, yes, class 3 uninhabited planet, and they had a charter for it. When it became a class 4 inhabited planet, however, they no longer had a charter. As the charter company for the planet, they had full control of facilities, utilities, everything. The spaceport was theirs. Hospitals, schools, everything was basically their responsibility and run and funded by them. When it became a charterless world, interim government was put in until there could be elections. That was Ben Rainsford, who was an ecologist from the first book. And in this book we see finally the elections, so now the planet has an elected body that will help control it. There's a lot in there that makes it an interesting book politically speaking, and I'm not going to get into that. The other thing about this though is, in the attempts to create a good electorate, the Friends of Little Fuzzy, so that's Jack Holloway and all the others who helped establish that they were sapient beings, end up teaming up with the CEO of the company, Victor Grego, who was the bad guy in number 1, becomes an actual more interesting person in the second book. In this one, he's keen to have a good electorate, and that means defeating a very, very crooked lawyer, and that brings law into it again. What I really liked about the first one is you've got a little bit of Wild West and a little bit of law. In the third one, in Fuzzies and Other People, once again you've got that law element. And here the sticking point is over the fact that Fuzzies don't seem to know how to lie. There's things that are and there are things that are not, and they don't know how to say something that is not as if it is. So that's a sticking point. It's a sticking point because Piper imagined a future world in which any statements made in court, whether they were defendants or witnesses, were veridicated. It's a veridicator, I think. Verifier? Veridicator, I'm pretty sure. So he wrote this in the 60s. This is way ahead of its time. And I'll just say right now, all 3 of these books have dated very well. They feel contemporary. There's small elements that are less contemporary, but overall, these could very well have been written now. They don't date in those infinitesimally small ways that, say, a Robert Heinlein would date, Asimov dates. Most older writers date. H.B. Piper doesn't seem to in this series. But the Veridicator, he clearly knew a fair bit about lie detector tests. I don't know how advanced those were in the 60s, but he envisaged a future where they had been advanced to the point where anyone in a court actually has to speak under veridication. So this involves putting on a helmet, I'm going to assume electrodes, he doesn't use that word, and behind them is a huge screen that stays blue while you're telling the truth, but turns red when you're telling something that isn't true. And then you've got all these variations of indigo and violet and flickering as the person who's under veridication thinks about things he might be able to get away with, things that may or may not be true. So it's really interesting. But in this trial where Fuzzies are the victims, they can't testify because in order to use a veridicator in court, you have to first show that it is working, and you do that by having someone say something that isn't true, which isn't something that Fuzzies can figure out. So I really like that. The ability to lie and prevaricate for personal gain. is treated here in an interesting way, and it reminds me of a non-fiction book that I read years ago where it was talking about the development of the IQ test. So the IQ test, whatever we may or may not say about it today, when it was first being accepted or promoted as a across-the-board test, it ran into some problems. And one story that was narrated in this book was when it was attempted to use on African tribesmen. The problem was that these tribesmen knew every single person in their tribe, and they knew where they lived, and they knew everything about them. So in order to ask them a question, they'd have to ask about a person who wasn't, and the tribesmen just could not pretend that someone who wasn't was. And in that regard, H. Beam Piper used something very similar in Fuzzies and Other People. Oh, sorry about the reflection. I keep getting this reflection. Which was very interesting. Now, there's a lot of other little bits of science in here that are unique and way ahead of their time, often, in small ways. Something that did make me laugh, it's throughout the Fuzzy books, but it really, really is obvious in this one. I don't know what H. Beam Piper's obsession with cocktails, highballs, and cocktail hour was, but it's kind of hilarious. And that does date it, because honestly, cocktails, even the most heavy drinking countries of the world, and Australia's a heavy drinking country, they're not the thing that they are here. So that's interesting. And he also kind of gently mocks the human inclination towards alcohol in Fuzzy Sapiens, but I think it comes to a head, if you will, in Fuzzies and Other People. So there's a lot about crime and punishment issues, and a lot about political issues, and the psychology of lying and IQ tests. There's also a little bit, it's not a big part of the plot, but it's there to flesh it out and make it all feel more real and more valid and important. There's the question of the ecology of extinction. So on Zarathustra, there's a huge animal called the pseudopterodactyl harpy. In Latin, italicized properly. And I love the fact that H. Beam Piper used Latin names for all of his species, including Little Fuzzy, who starts off as Fuzzy Holloways, which is great. So pseudopterodactyl harpy is exactly what it sounds like. It's this huge flying predator, reminiscent of a pterodactyl, a harpy, and it's dangerous to humans. So humans have come very close to eradicating it. And it's a great thing that, as a tiny aside, they've inserted what an extinction to a high-level predator is going to do to the whole ecosystem. So I really like that. Another thing that Fuzzies and Other People does, which is unique in the Fuzzy trilogy, is you get a point of view from Fuzzies that is pre-contact Fuzzies. So the interesting thing about Little Fuzzy is that it starts off with Jack Holloway finding a Fuzzy. He finds a cute animal that goes yeek yeek and has pretty fur and is friendly, and moves in to live with him. And slowly we start to develop the knowledge that this cute little fuzzy animal is in fact a sapient being thinking on a high level of mentation, at least equivalent, it's suggested, to 6 to 10-year-old child. But in Little Fuzzy, the point of view, small points of view that we get aren't from Little Fuzzy. In Fuzzy Sapiens, we start to get point of view of Fuzzies, but they're, of course, they're post-contact with humans Fuzzies. Whereas in Fuzzies and Other People, one of the other points of view is from Wise One, who's the leader of a band of 8 wild Fuzzies who have never encountered humans, and it talks about their first sight of a flying airship and their first hearing of a gun that kills a harpy. So that's interesting. It was really exciting to have these different point of views. And so yes, the anthropology of social groups in hunter-gatherers, that was great. The question of ability to lie, all of these things are great. And the ending is... No, before I get to the ending. So in the about halfway through, or possibly in the last third of the book, the event suggested by the forest fire on the cover occurs. Little Fuzzy goes with his friend Diamond to see a mine. He gets separated from Diamond and people, washed downstream. he meets up with this tribe of 8 wild fuzzies and wise one, and he teaches them how to make a lot of things, do a lot of things. He wants to build a raft to get back to humanity. He keeps telling them about Hoxomizo, I think it is, wonderful place where he lives with Jack Holloway, with Puppy Jack. He wants to get back there. They want to go with him. They're building a raft. They start the forest fire, which is how Jack Holloway, Puppy Jack, finally figures out that little Fuzzy must be out there and comes searching for him. Also great. But in the process of this, we find out that Wise One has learned to prevaricate. He told an active thing that wasn't so in order to get his group to do something that he wanted them to do. So that's a poignant example of developing lies for your own benefit. Though Wise One is actually group-minded, I guess you'd say. He's going to do this thing. He knows it'll be better for the rest of his group if they come with him. He knows they won't want to, so he lies about being chased by a predator in order to get them to do what he wants. And that brings us to the ending of the book, once again in court, where the Fuzzies are veridicated, and now that there's one that knows how to say something that isn't so, they can be tried or give witness under the veridicator. It's great. It's a very fulfilling, very satisfying ending, and I loved it. I did feel, though, that H.B. Piper was basically doing a thing that he'd done before. And a couple of times in the last bit, I did wonder a little bit if maybe he wasn't getting a little bit bored with the series. I don't know if he'd have gone on to write other ones. If he had, I'd have read them. As it is, will I go out and find and read the books written by other people? I don't know. I'm deeply ambivalent about that. Roger Zelazny's Amber series also had someone else come in to write more books in the series. I'm ambivalent about them as well. I get it if you've got something... Was it Wheel of Time where the author died? If you've been reading the last 2 or 3 decades this series with 20 books the size of Dangerous Weapons and the author dies before you get to the end, I can see why you would desperately want someone to finish that series off for you. But H.B. Piper, like Zelazny, was old school writer. He wrote a book, and the book had an ending, and the story had the end of a story arc. Now, could you say more about the Fuzzies and their world? Of course you could, because no story ever ends. It always turns into another story. Do we really need it? I'm not sure. But I would like to hear what you think. If you thoroughly enjoyed the Fuzzy series by H.B. Piper and you've read more of them that were written by other people, incidentally they're all authors I've never heard of, which doesn't encourage me a great deal. I'd love to hear what you thought of them. Is it worth continuing on? Should I not? Decisions. Thank you for watching this review of Fuzzies and Other People. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very, very much to everyone who has liked, who has commented and subscribed. I now have over 200 subscribers, and I am that's a real warm and fuzzy moment for me. I'm glad you enjoy my reviews. Look forward to doing more. And have a great day. And as always, read good books.